Hello, everyone. Welcome. Today we are going to move forward into this section of providing an overview of trauma, understanding the impact of trauma on brain, and really laying the foundation for the work that we will be doing as you move throughout this training. Right? Because trauma has monumental impact on the body. Trauma is an event, a series of events, circumstances, or accumulation of experiences that are life threatening, that can cause extreme fear, distress, and impact our physical, our emotional, mental, social, and spiritual sense of safety in the world. These experiences can overwhelm our capacity for coping. And trauma is also subjective and based on the lived experiences of each and every individual. What is traumatic to you is traumatic to you. Your story is important. Your feelings are valid. There are so many experiences that can fall into being a traumatic event. A traumatic event is life threatening, it can cause intense fear, can compromise your sense of physical or emotional safety in the world, and can cause PTSD, symptoms of PTSD. Um, it could be a suffering from a physical injury, receiving a serious medical diagnosis, being the victim of rape, sexual assault, mugging, robbery, enduring various types of abuse, physical, emotional, sexual, witnessing, experiencing, and plane crash or car crash, experiencing or witnessing a natural disaster, war, terrorism, experiencing a stressful life event such as divorce, unemployment, illness, death of a loved one. So we cannot compartmentalize the way that people experience trauma. Trauma impacts all aspects of our human functioning, the physical, the mental, the behavioral, the social, and the spiritual. And this physical and emotional violation to the body oftentimes results in feelings of intense fear, powerlessness, hopelessness, because what happens that trauma oftentimes overwhelms our internal resources. So all the things that are important to you around control, connection, meaning that has that become compromised. And trauma in many ways become imprinted on our lived experiences. So we also have to consider that the complexity, the layer of trauma, that it can also include systemic trauma and trauma from discrimination. So when someone is being oppressed, this can show up in their body as their physical sensation, something known as embodied inequality or race based trauma. Dr. Gail Parker, she talks about how yoga and meditation oftentimes helps people of color to experience safety and their vulnerability. She also shares that this is a really new learning for you know, people who might have this ongoing, cumulative, recurrent nature of racial stress. So that people of color need the therapeutic experience of learning to rest in ways that feel safe, of knowing what the absence of stress feels like. And become trauma informed, we can create the space for folks to, for everyone to gently unpack what rest means for them and to help them build new neural pathways to ground them in their own way. Trauma is somatic, right? Trauma not always stories. It's not always narratives. It is felt physical sensations in the body. And this may be familiar to you. Experiences like, dysregulated breathing, digestive disorders, overworking, anxiety, flashback, hypervigilance, migraines, chronic pain, numbness. These visceral feelings that we experience in the body are oftentimes a result of our vagus nerve disengaging. So the vagus nerve plays an instrumental role in the terms of expressing our emotions in our body, right? And the practicing trauma-informed yoga is just one modality of many to help survivors stimulate the vagus nerve, helping you to manage a variety of these psychosomatic symptoms. So the vagus nerve is a 10th cranial nerve. When we feel safe, the ventral branch of the vagus nerve supports our ability to feel and access rest and calm. It's essentially a rest and digest nerves. It helps us really understand the interconnection between our gut and our emotional state. And we know that feeling from trauma can oftentimes be a lifelong process. The impact of trauma can, of course, linger in the body long after a trauma happened, experienced. It can manifest in the body as a trigger. So, trigger being a physiological response outside of your control that oftentimes reminds you of your past experiences. So, if you are going through extreme stress, right? If you are experiencing flashbacks, if you are having a nightmare, then you will smell certain perfumes or cologne or certain type of people. You will be placed right back in the traumatic experience as if it was happening in this moment, right? As Andrea Pappins, she said this so beautifully that anything that reminds us of a previous danger that we have encountered can activate our physiology. So, in yoga terms, trauma causes something called vasanas. Vasanas are essentially emotional imprints that live in our body, right? For example, you may experience your heart races when you think about your trauma. And that is because trauma get rooted or hardwired or lodged in various areas of our body depending on the nature of what we have experienced. It has impact on our nervous system, our endocrine system, our overall physiology, and it causes things like chronic pain, illness, number of physical symptoms. And so often these are somatic reenactment of trauma that people have experienced, the survivors of sexual or physical violence have experienced. So, for many of us, they are the survival strategies. They deserve so much gentleness, care, not stigma and shame. When we are experiencing triggers, we are oftentimes responding to the present moment as if it is the past. Our body misread the cues. We have these alarm bells that go off and on. So, even if our rational brain is waking, our logical brain is waking, and saying that I am safe, I am safe, I am safe in this moment. That is not happening. From the neck down, the emotional lower brain does not feel safe. And Jenny Nicholas says this is so powerfully. The body oftentimes knows grief before the mind does. And Dr. Peter Levine, he has done a lot of work in somatic therapy and the movements. And he says, I do want to say that this can be really hard to hear at times, and it is also very accurate what it might be like for a survivor of trauma moving through the world. And this is one of the reasons why moving through the world with trauma can be so isolating, because sometimes it feels like a very invisible pain. So Peter Levine says, I don't know of one thing I don't fear. I fear getting out of a bed in the morning. I fear walking out of my home. I have great fears of death. Not that I will die someday, but I am going to die within the next few minutes. I fear anger, my own and everyone else's, even when anger is not even present. I fear rejection and abandonment. I fear success and failure. I get pain in my chest and tingling and numbness in my arms and legs every day. I almost experience cramps ranging from the menstrual type cramps and intense pain. I just really hurt most of the time. I have shortness of breath, racing heart, disorientation and panic. I'm always cold and have a dry mouth. I have trouble swallowing. I have no energy or motivation. And when I do accomplish something, I feel no sense of satisfaction. I feel overwhelmed, confused, and lost. I have an uncontrollable outburst of rage and depression. So I invite you to take a moment here to pause and notice what might have come up for you, hearing those reflections from the survivors. I think it's very powerful portrayal of the way that their nervous system has been compromised and the type of physical emotional energy that they are carrying with them, and that might be coming with them to their yoga mat if they ever have the courage to get there. And I can tell you, having the opportunity to do this work with survivors, there is nothing quite as powerful as seeing those incremental changes and continue to build over time. When clients start there with their experience, and then they're really trusting their journey of those embodied shifts and seeing them ultimately find safety in the bodies again, is really the power of this work we will be doing. So it's such an honor to hold this space for you, to be witness to the incredible work that you are doing here today and going to continue to do. We are going to come back to that in a little bit, but just really holding the power of supporting each other with finding ease, with finding safety, and with finding joy is why our work is so important here today. And here is another experience from a survivor, and for me, really sums up all the hoops that they oftentimes have to jump through when getting connected to the support services. And as I read this, I am reminded how often Survivors share that they not only feel victimized by the assault, but they again by the system, oftentimes being met with folks, people who do not believe them. And we just can't continue to send people through these various systems without giving them the tools to balance their own nervous system, to prioritize their wellness and build a resiliency and growth. So there, and the numbers are speak the volume. The national that are intimate partner and sexual violence is estimate that so yeah, the third of New Zealand adults, 30.2% have experienced physical and sexual violence offenses committed by an intimate partner in their lifetime. And 56% of women experience intimate partner violence, including psychological abuse, in their lifetime. This is very high in Maori Wahine as well. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 8 men have experienced one or more sexual assault in their lifetime. Violence is hidden and often goes unreported. So only 6.6% of sexual violence is reported to the police. Women experience more types of violence more frequently and severely than men. More women reported serious injuries, fear, and physical and mental health impacts following intimate partner violence. And 74% of people killed by their partners between 2007 and 2021 were women. And 44% of disabled people have experienced sexual assault. And almost 1 in 2 LGBTQIA plus people have experienced sexual assault, which is about 45%. So we must look into this and how impact everyone and bringing up to the surface for those who might be moving through the world with years of unprocessed trauma. And for those who might be healing and identifying as survivors. So here we're going to take 15 minutes break so go grab a cup of coffee and tea, go to a toilet if you need, and just come back here for after 15 minutes. So welcome back. Hopefully that gave you a bit break. And sometimes, it's important to, especially the sessions like this, taking a break. It's a lot of information you are taking in. So I hope that you had a little bit time to nourish yourself. So I won't spend too much time going over these victim blaming responses because you can read, more about it in books or you can refer to other educational resources. But I don't want you to have a sense of some of the ways that survivors oftentimes internalize the various victim blaming responses that they receive. This is so giving you an idea of the layer of emotional trauma that may be coming into that maybe you will be bringing into these spaces that we are holding for each other. So things like self-blame, lack of trust, lack of control, fear, minimization of their experiences, isolation, and something that I think is the most damaging is this notion that it's not okay to feel the way that you feel, or that your feelings are not valid. One of the most common statement that survivors hear is, why didn't you run away? Why didn't you fight back harder? And you'd also know fight, flight, and freeze response, right? Many survivors, the fight and flight is happening in 50% of rape cases, experiencing something called tonic immobility or rape induced paralysis. So, this is when during an assault, your body becomes physically frozen and you are unable to move, oftentimes out of fear, because it's that if you move, you're going to be harmed further. So when you hear things like, why didn't you fight back or why didn't you run away, it actually completely minimizing your experiences and making you feel like you could have done more to prevent the assault from happening to you, leading to further shame and internalizing the experience, isn't it? So symptoms of trauma can oftentimes fall into PTSD symptoms cluster. And these are anything but linear. You can move in and out of these phrases where the experiences you experience things like arousal, you may be reliving that traumatic event experience, things like nightmare, flashback, persistent episodic recollections of the experiences, numbing, lack of interest in things, loss of emotional tone, avoidance of addressing feelings, sort of pushing it down. Dissociation, that is another common and oftentimes is out of body experience where survivors disengage from their body because PTSD has overwhelmed the nervous system. Avoidance and vigilance, um, getting angry or agitated, anxiety. So that is really an essence of trauma. Dissociation is a strategy to leave the body, the overwhelming experience that is often times fragmented. So emotions and sensory information, sounds, images, physical sensation related to trauma start to take a life of their own. A traumatic event may have a beginning and an end, right? At some point, it may be over, right? But people with survivors with PTSD, flashback can happen anytime, right? Whether you are awake or asleep. So there is no way of knowing when it's going to happen and how long it might last. So PTSD is really the body's way of communicating that we have this undigested sensory residue that want to be processed. Those vasanas that we talked about earlier. There is so much research that is supported by the health organization NIH that shows that 10 weeks of trauma-informed yoga dramatically reduced PTSD symptoms for survivors who did not respond to medications or other type of treatment. The research was conducted in 8 different across 8 different University of California campuses who implemented 8-week trauma-informed yoga program for survivors. And there was incredible research that came back that really showed the evidence-based impact of the program. They did a pre-test and a post-test and another assessment after the yoga course, the yoga program. And it showed significant increases in the safety, self-compassion, decreases in the symptoms of depression and PTSD. So I know oftentimes when we starting to do this work, it is important to become aware of the research so you know what you're getting into. And the impact of trauma on the brain. We are talking about the trauma on how trauma impact on our brain because I really do feel that this helps inform the overall survivor's experience. That is really foundational to the work that we are doing. And it is important to integrate trauma-informed yoga and yoga spaces with the clinical setting. So you may have heard this term from me before or someone else or online, the amygdala. The amygdala is the part of our brain that is responsible for keeping us safe. It's a sort of our emotional control center responsible for the fight, flight, and the freeze response. So the impact of trauma on the amygdala is that it's constantly keeping it in overdrive. It's constantly identifying danger, threat, even when danger and threat may not be present. So remember, anything that we sense is a threat can activate our physiology. So this is one reason why trauma survivors, why you may be living in a fear and anxiety, and why resting can be so difficult, or why stillness of meditation can be so difficult, because our brain is constantly firing danger. And it can be so exhausting and scary to not know the difference between safety and danger. The hippocampus is responsible for the formation of new memories, new concepts, new skill, and the way these two interact during trauma is that when the amygdala is constantly searching for imminent threats. So if your brain, there is an almond shape in your brain, so the left brain and the right brain, and it is shaped, connected by this almond shape little object, which is amygdala, and the hippocampus is part of the amygdala. So when the way these two intersect during trauma is that when the amygdala is constantly searching for imminent threat, the hippocampus gets flooded with the cortisol. That is a stress hormone. That's what makes it so challenging for survivors oftentimes to recall certain memories that are associated with the trauma. So the best visual I can give you, that if you can imagine that you had a posted notes on your desk, right? For example, let's say that I have this posted note. And then I crumbled it, right? And then what is happening? It's moved out in an order, and then I throw it in the trash or hid somewhere in the drawers. This is oftentimes what's happening in our memories that we have associated with the trauma, because it becomes so fragmented. So after the trauma, our brain shut down. So during the trauma, the speech center can shut down. This is how we survive through that difficult time. This is why you may have, such a difficult experience articulating what happened to you in words. And why talk therapy can at times be limiting. And that's why having body based interventions and offering multiple forms of expressions and healing from trauma is so critical. And that's why I use EMDR and IFS, because I feel also that talk therapy doesn't really help. It does in a sense when sometimes you can't be going through EMDR and IFS session all the time because it can be very overwhelming. And in between we use talk therapy, but it is not really gonna change or help you to heal from trauma. So during trauma, the nervous system becomes very reactive in order to respond to real or to the perceived threat. So even though the threat is not real, it can feel very real. Trauma can push us into these states of hyperarousal. That's like, a red light. When you experience that increased sensation to stop that accelerator, right, on that. But imagine if you can't stop that. You are flooded with emotional reactivity because that's dangerous, isn't it? So living in a constant state of hyperarousal is so deeply exhausting. It leads to adrenal fatigue. Our bodies are not designed to constantly be in that state. So when we are in that hyperarousal state, we can experience numbness, dissociation, fatigue, flat energy. We can move in and out of these states of regulations and dysregulation. So, practicing yoga in trauma informed movements can support you with really starting to soothe your nervous system, to find connection amidst that chaos, amidst the mind, body, and soul, amidst all that disintegration that is happening, that is caused by trauma. And I love this reminder by Tyndall Schreiner. When it feels disheartening to learn that trauma changes the brain, remember that healing changes the brain too. So I hope that is just an anchor and a grounding reminder of how powerful this work is, of helping and recognizing, rebuilding those neural pathways, and then building that resilience, right? So I'm excited to dive into this a little bit more with you when we get to the more sessions, but it is important. So keep in mind that trauma does influence how we approach and respond to the service, which is why experiences of trauma, to recognize expression of trauma, the way it might manifest, and not acknowledge the role that it plays in people's lives. मैं की करना कटूंगी किदां ਨੂੰ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਅੱਛਾ ਡੇਢ ਘੰਟੇ ਵਾਲਾ ਘੰਟੇ The goal ultimately with trauma informed care is to support the healing and the growth at all cost and to avoid re-traumatization. So implementing trauma-informed movement is a philosophy and a skill set. It's a way, again, of truly seeing and feeling grounded in your body. Okay? So some of the core components of trauma-informed care are safety, trust, choice, collaboration, empowerment, and cultural competence. And sometimes that's important to keep in mind that experiencing victimization during the help seeking disclosure reporting period. Okay, so I hope that you had a good moment to pause and take a break. So now I want to talk about a little bit about the vagus nerve. You may have heard the term vagus nerve before, and that's what we have been talking about it already without actually naming it. But I want to go back and I want to layer in this piece of physiology because it is so important to understand about the vagus nerve, particularly when we are talking about delivering embodied trauma informed practice. So, the vagus nerve is a primary component of our autonomic nervous system and it plays a major role in the modulation and the regulation of our nervous system responses. It's parasympathetic nerve and it's very interesting nerve because about 80 to 90% of its fiber are responsible for conveying, communicating sensory information. So it passes on the information from the body and different body organs being um yeah so and yeah different body organs being delivered back to the brain. Okay, so when you think about a nerve pathway, that is a huge volume of sensory information that's passing through one nerve plexus. And really, the vagus nerve connect with our major organ system. So that includes the heart, the lungs, the entire gastrointestinal system, our abdominal, liver, spleen, all of them. So it's a huge volume of information that is being communicated to the brain through this one nerve pathway because of the fibers that it contains, which is 90%. So, what's even more interesting and complex about the vagus nerve is that the other 20% of its fiber that are not sensory, they are actually the motor fibers. So, what does that mean? That they are sending message from the brain back to the body. And that 20% motor fibers are actually two totally separate and distinct branches of the vagus nerve, which arise from completely different areas in the brainstem. And essentially, what that means is that those two different branches of the vagus nerves are doing different things at different times. So, when we talk about vagus nerve, we are not talking about like a single nerve that goes from point A to point B. We are talking about something much more complex. It's multi branches in our nervous system, right? So, think like a orchestra. Like vagus nerve is just like an orchestra. It's an ensemble of that is made up of these different parts. So when there is a conductor, all those parts can play together, right? If you have orchestra, if you play orchestra, or if you have been to orchestra, the instrument can only work if all the parts working, right? To make harmonious music. If one wire doesn't work from that, one muscle doesn't work from the vagus nerve, it's gonna disrupt the entire tone. It's gonna totally change it. That's how our vagus nerve is similar to that. So what I like to do is to go back through and layer in the different branches of vagus nerve on the top of the different gears and circuits that we have already been exploring while getting to know our autonomic nervous system. So when we talk about the vagus nerve, we talk about the polyvagal circuits of response, because polyvagal means many vagus. We have got multiple branches here. Now we still have our sympathetic system, which is a branch of our autonomic nervous system, and that is equivalent to your gas pedal, right? The accelerator that mobilize our body in response to the stimuli, mobilize us into stress response or fight flight response. And if you recall, we had parasympathetic brakes, the brake. We had the brake pedal. So the brake pedal that is help us to pause, to stop according to the situations. And we also have emergency brake, right? So those two different braking mechanisms of the parasympathetic nervous system are actually correlating to the two different motor branches of vagus nerve, right? One of them is called the ventral vagus, other is called the dorsal vagus, right? They are named this way because of the positioning of how they come out of a brainstem. So the ventral vagus comes out of an area in the brain stem just to the front, right? And the dorsal vagus comes out an area of brainstem just behind the vagal ventral system. So the ventral means front, which is our front cortex. Dorsal means back. Okay. So the ventral vagus is equivalent to a brake pedal. Right? That's your brake. It's actually and literally when it is online, acts like a conductor of the whole vagus nerve. So it can stand at the podium with its conductor button, and when what it does, that is recruit all of the fibers of the vagus nerve, including the sensory fibers and including the dorsal vagus fiber, to work together to be in a good balance. So when they're working together, that's a good balance. And that's literally a brake pedal on the rate of our heart rate beating, right? So when the ventral vagus is online, it's like there is a brake on our heart and it keeps our heart rate steady, right? And as our heart rate is steady, allows our breathing rate to stay steady, right? So the ventral vagus is online when we are in a safety physiology, when we feel safe within our body. And the ventral vagus allow us to be flexible, to have slight rises in arousal to meet the difficult situation, going into a full-blown into fight-flight response. Right, so in other words, you can say that ventral vagus keep the foot on the brake of our heart rate and our respiration, and it can lift slightly to allow a little bit of mobilization, and then it comes back down and slow things back down again, right? So now when we start detecting signals of stress that are indicating we are not safe, the foot starts to lift more and more of the brake. It starts to depress more and more to accelerator. So as we know, that's when our body starts to move into that fight flight response. Now at some point the foot lifts totally off the brake and ventral vagus comes offline. So when the ventral vagus not online anymore, because there is no longer conductor guiding the orchestra, now it's the sympathetic system, the branch, the gas, the accelerator takes over. Now we are on a immobilized state, and we are able to get into the mobilized state because the brake has come off of our heart rate. Our heart rate speeds up, breathing speeds up, and all that is preparing our body to fight or flight. There are lots of other changes that are happening physiologically during a mobilization process. So part of our prefrontal cortex comes offline, so we are in more subcortical and instinctive level of response. From a body level, the HPA axis upregulate, so that the net result of that is the stress hormone, cortisol, and adrenaline are pumping through the body and preparing our body for fight and flight. So there are all kinds of physiological changes that happens when we are in the more mobilized state. So when you remember at certain point and facing the stress signal, our bodies sometimes very quickly, sometimes maybe not so quickly, will we hit the tipping point where the body no longer feels like it has a viable pathway out through fight and flight. And what happens that's when that the dorsal nerve comes on. Yeah. It grabs the baton and it begins to direct the show. What happens then is that it's like emergency brake being pulled in our bodies. Our bodies go into the freeze mode, and that means things will shut down and we move into very conservation physiology. And I also want to talk about here a little bit is that about the social nervous system. It turns out when our ventral nerve vagus is also often referred as our social nervous system or our social engagement system. And this is really important because basically what it means that our vagus nerve originate from an area in the brain where other cranial nerves that controls our facial expression, our body language, our vocalization, the muscle of our inner ear are grouped, right? And together they create the social engagement system. So what it really means that our vagus nerve is serving at a very visceral level social signals to determine whether we are safe or whether we are not. So among the signals that it is sending for us, the cues, for example, the facial expression, the micro expression, and microexpressions are not full-blown facial expressions, but rather tiny little shifts in our facial structure. For example, a little furrow between the eyebrows, like doing this. Maybe a little tick up or down at the corner of the mouth. Shift on our facial features. They convey a lot of information. So it's Vagus nerve is assessing our body language, the posture, the gesture, the very importantly, the tone of someone's voice and the cadence of their speech. So, vagus nerves would refer to the rhythm and the rise and the fall or the melody of the someone's speech. It's assessing those signals, assessing those social signals, assessing external environment, internal somatic cues that are coming through those sensory pathways of the vagus nerves from the body to the brain. And also those social cues that I just mentioned to you, that facial expression, tone of voice, body language, is determining whether we are safe or not. Now, the word that was coined by Stephen Bogus, who brought us this understanding of the vagus nerve and polyvagal theory, which this is based on. The word that the coined to describe the ability to vagus nerve to perceive safety signals or lack of safety signals for us is neuroception. So what that means is that safety is not just a cognitive expression. It's it's not just a cognitive, like we thinking our mind is thinking that we are not safe or safe or whether safe. Our body is perceiving that information as well, right? So if you are with someone, right, and if that person is coming across as intimidating or coming across as rude or sending you signal that is not making you feel in their presence safe, feel safe in in their presence, so your brain is immediately observing the body language, facial expressions, and that's your mind thinking, doing the thinking in the background. And then your mind doing the thinking in the background, sending all those signals back to your body. And if your mind and body connect that, okay, yep, it does feel like we are not safe here, then we will try to get out of that environment quickly as soon as we can. That's the power of the nervous system and the vagus nerve. And if we look at the layers of the vagus nerve, going back to the model of the temperature thermometer, which we talked about at the start of this lesson, what we can see here is that these three adaptive responses are correlating with three different polyvagal circuits. So the safety zone of the physiology is where the ventral vagus is online and running the show and recruiting all of the fibers of the vagus nerves to work together. So that's the ventral vagus working together with all the fiber. It's online, it's running, the show is recruiting all that fibers in the ventral vagus nerves, which is 80% of that, and it's running it smoothly, right? We have a brake pedal, and we have a steady heart rate and steady breathing rate. We are in a pretty calm state, right? And but that doesn't mean just connecting with other people as well. It means connection with our bodies too. So it means we are able to connect with others and other beings, and it means connection with the environment around us. When we move into that orange zone, we are in our sympathetic field. This is where we are mobilized state of fight or flight. When we move into this upper threshold of overwhelm, that is our dorsal vagus taking over, we move into the states of shutting down or immobilization. Now, that's really important to understand is that we are born, we do not have all these circuits available. They are not fully developed when we are born. We are born with a fully functioning dorsal nerve, actually, dorsal vagus. So, what that means is that when we are young, our body can move very successfully into states of immobilization and freeze in order to keep us safe in adverse conditions. That's why childhood trauma becomes frozen in your brain, in your mind, because only system that was fully functioning that time was dorsal vagus. Makes sense? So when we are born, we have a sympathetic response online in our body. However, we don't have a muscle definition and strength or a structural strength to have that fight and flight response. So when you are born, right, you cannot fight, you cannot flight. What happens? We only freeze. And that's because when we born, when we young, we do not have a vagus nerve available to us then. We only have a fully functioning dorsal vagus. So we can feel the body's desire to get away from something, to run or to fight, but we can't actually do that because we don't have a complete sympathetic system, right? So when we are born, when we don't have that fully functioning ventral vagus online, our ventral vagus doesn't start developing until the third trimester of gestation. So it's really developing most significantly in the first 3 to 5 years of life. So ventral vagus start to develop from 3 to 5 years of life, but our entire social engagement system is actually really developing all through childhood, adolescence, and even into young adulthood. Okay. And the reason I mention this for a couple of important reasons, because many of us may have experienced adversity early on, and that can look like anything, right? It's very possible that this part of our nervous system, our safety, might be offline and it did not get fully developed. And it's also possible that often the case, even that if that ventral vagus was online from childhood, that encountered overwhelming events like a sexual assault, it can send our body into state where this part of circuit actually goes offline because of not being fully developed. So we are looking at the temperature thermometer a little bit earlier in this side. So if you look at that dysregulated nervous system that are back and forth between shutdown and hierarchical, what's happened here is that the social engagement system is temporarily offline. Our body has forgotten how to come back into safety. So now that's important for a lot of reason, because one of the reason that is most important has to do with the power of our own nervous system, as it being able to understand that, holding a safe space for yourself, right? And that's really important to know about the social engagement system. Even if it's offline, we can effectively bring it back online. We can do that, absolutely. And that's one of the most beautiful things about the nervous system. It has a plasticity, and we can repeat, we can grow new neural pathways. We can prune away old neural pathways with ongoing healing journey, therapy, trauma-informed movements. And that is really encouraging and that nervous system can always heal. And but now I would like you to think about different expression of fight, flight, and freeze, because when we look at this graph, it looks very sequential and very linear, and it helps to break things down into kind of a linear progression when we are learning about them. But the truth of the matter is that the nervous system isn't linear. Nothing about the nervous system is black and white. It's all about gradation, and it's all about spectrum of the experience. So even healthy, well-regulating nervous system is a nervous system that's moving back and forth between various aspects or various states of arousal and coming back to safety. So I would like you to think about a thermometer, and I would like you to take this progression and sort of blend it into a circle so that we can look at this graph that looks a little bit more like this. Because it's really important to talk about some of the different survival responses, right? So you can see that on that slide 15, we still got that three zones, three sectors of physiology. We got safety, we got danger, and we have got overwhelm. So in the safety, this is where our system comes online. This is where our sympathetic, our ventral nerve vagus is functioning and regulating things for us. And this is where we can feel connection as we move into danger, and then we start to move into mobilization. So our sympathetic response take over. However, fight flight doesn't always look like a fight or flight. Sometimes it can look like something called tend and befriend. So tend and befriend is a little bit of hybrid state between social cues and mobilization energy. So what that looks like that for some of us, when a nervous system starts to detect danger, we will move into responses that look like caretaking responses. So that might mean we start to focus on taking care of people around us or anticipating their needs, making things happen for them. So fixing things in our environment so it doesn't get worse. That's where the people pleasing comes in. Right? So one of the ways that we learn how to manage mobilization is through tending and befriending and caretaking those around us. It can look like, never slowing down, never stopping, go, 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 constantly staying busy, refusing people's help, just doing everything on your own. So these are all various behavioral expressions of mobilization energy that strongly laden with the social cueing. Now, if we go over around the circle of more of the overwhelm response, where we are going to be experiencing more like a freeze in response or a collapse response, we also can encounter another adaptive expression of overwhelm response, which is called fawning. Fawning means that appeasement behavior. Again, same thing, taking care of other people. The compliance behavior often will show up when there have been patterns of power imbalance. Right? You may grow up in a household where there was a lot of chaos, and when there was a lot of abuse, and you learned at a really early age that you could not flee, you could not fight, You just learn how to stay safe by shifting and adapting yourself and making yourself small and fitting in so that you are coloring inside of the lines of whatever was allowed and permitted. Often, this can look like people pleasing, as we talked about before, code switching, shifting your behavior to fit the environment, to fit the context of whatever environment you are in. And that's adaptive response, and it can show up is if it, even if we have grown up in inhabiting social identities that are not honored and celebrated by the dominant culture, or because of the color of the skin. It could be because of your gender identity. It could be because of your sexual orientation, your nationality, your immigrant status. If you grew up in embodying traits that were not honored by the dominant cultures, the likelihood is that you learned that it wasn't safe walking down the street. Like in my culture, girls are never safe. They walk down the street at night after 5, 6 p.m. in the winter. So we had to learn how to shift our behaviors to fly under the radar. So that's coupled with the power differential where there is a real embedded life threat. With learning how to use social cues and social skills to keep yourself safe, you're gonna fly under the radar and fitting into the parameters of acceptability. And the reason I want to share that with you that I'm actually going to go ahead right now and hop out of the screen share and come back to full view with you. So the reason that I share that with you is that when we are talking about working with other people, we are talking about trauma-informed awareness. So what is really important to know that there may be people that you are living with or you have in your life their survival response that don't look like a typical fight, flight, or freeze response that are actually so more complex, right? So particularly, tricky around the issues of consent. For example, does somebody really means yes, they are okay with you touching them just because they say yes when you ask them? Or they're saying yes because they think that's the right thing to say? They're a difference, right? So if I want you to just be a bit mindful about the possibility, this is something that can show up very, very readily. So acknowledge and possibility the compliance behavior might be happening. Yes or no question is not always the best way to collaborate sense of understanding, right? So having taken this little detour, let's talk a bit more about the vagus nerve and co-regulation because the last bit that I mentioned before we talked about is behavioral expressions. We can't fake a safety within our body, right? There is this amazing phenomenon that happens. It's called co-regulation, and what it basically means that our bodies, our visceral states are communicating with each other. So nervous system to nervous system, endocrine system to endocrine system. Your body knows when you are safe because it can feel it, whether your system is in a state of safety or whether they're not. Right? So it's about understanding that we talked about facial expression, we talked about body language, we talked about the tone of voice. I want to walk you through a progression of how immediate this is that the vagus nerves can detect safety for us through our facial, through our social cues. Just like, I'm talking to you right now. You can see me, you can hear me, you can see my body language, my facial expression. And I want you to tune into how you're feeling in your body as you are listening to me. Right? I want you to see how does your body feel now that I'm talking to you like this. I'm talking in a monotone voice, my facial expressions more like a, you know, flat maybe, and I'm not using gestures and the body's really still. Can you feel something shift inside of your own body? Maybe you felt a little bit of recoil, like a fingernail on a chalkboard. That is your vagus nerve. That is how immediately your visceral states respond to the cueing that is coming from another person. So, yeah, that's what I mean when I say you can't fake being in safety physiology. If you have a flat effect, if you are in a defensive posture, if your voice and cadence and the speech is impacted by being stressed out, you're going to feel that. Everyone is going to feel that. All right. So it's important to know because more than anything, more than any skill you put into practice is your body. Your ability to be in a well co-regulating nervous system that allows you to create the relational field of safety for yourself and for other people. I cannot underscore that enough. Okay? We are not trying to avoid it anymore. We just want to recognize it. Yeah? And this is one of the most, in my mind, that important component of really embodying trauma-informed awareness. Trauma-informed awareness is that so what I would like to do here is that stretch our time just a little bit longer because we have talked about through some example and how trauma we have talked about a lot actually how trauma impact our brain, our physiology, our nervous system. Now I would like to talk you through some examples of how you begin to actually cultivate this awareness of your autonomic nervous system, your ups and downs, and to start to build in more of that ability to be a conscious co-regulatory force. So, in terms of activation and tracking signals, it's really, really important to track settling and the nervous system and how it speaks to us through activation, through body sensations. That is its primary language. So, there are some very common areas that you can begin to kind of have soft awareness around your own body. To be able to track our activation and as well as settling. So, some of the things to look out for are changes in your heart rate. If your heart starts beating faster, or maybe it's not beating faster, but you can feel it pounding, or you can hear it pumping, those are the typical signs of activation. And when the body is settling, that what will happen there with that heart rate is, if we have noticed it beating or thumping, or then we won't notice that anymore. It will stabilize, it will quiet down and fade into the background. Another sign of activation is changes in our breathing. So if your breathing is shallow, rapid, erratic, or any changes, that's a common signal that if you are holding your breath, that is a sign of activation, right? Because when we are stable in our emotional state, when we are well co-regulated, our breath is more spacious, it's less effortful, it's that, more calm and composed. And often we will have experiences of our body spontaneously sighing or even yawning, which are really beautiful signs, often of like down regulation, like if I was sitting there like, that means our body's like, I'm relaxed. So that's a sign that your body's like, yeah, it's just time to relax. After that long day, when you get that sigh, and it's like a sign, yeah, I'm home. So that's the sign. And in regards to the body temperature, you may notice shift in the body, such as heat, sweating, flushing, or your body's feeling more really, really chilled, right? When our body is settling, what we often notice with body temperature are more localized areas of warmth. Like, maybe your hands are warm or your feet are warm. Maybe you notice a warmth in your jaw or chest or your belly. That's our body's way to tell us about our nervous system. In terms of our thinking patterns, when we are being activated, we are activating our thoughts that are often scattered. Maybe they are looping, maybe we feel foggy brained. When our system is more stable and settled, our thoughts are just quieted. We are able to have a sense of our surrounding, like sound, smell, colors. Light looks brighter. Another area would be muscle tension, bracing, clenching, constriction in your throat, or any areas of your body. That is a sign of activation again, because that's a biological reflex. Our body, our muscle, our facial metrics contract in a response to stress or threat signs. So that is true from the time we are gestating in the womb. When our body is settling, what we will often experience is that some time of tension or bracing is starting to soften, and you will feel warmth or buzzing or tingling or vibration. And one of the things that I want you to understand about tracking your body's responses is that skills and tools and practices that you find helpful for your nervous system in terms to when it's activated to respond to that activation, right? So having those tools that feel supported and you feel that it's a resource for you, important to have them. If you try on a skill that somebody tells you is really good and will help calm your nervous system down, then it's a good tool. But if someone tells you a tool that activate your nervous system, then that's not a good tool for you to be using, right? Because no one size fits all. It's important for us to understand about our nervous system in general that we are all wired differently. Our bodies hold different histories, lived stories, lived experiences, and it responds to practices differently as well. They heal, they recover in very individual ways. So, what works as a resource for one person will not work for everyone, right? Slow, gene based practices are not going to be helpful and down regulating for everyone, right? Some of us need a more vigorous practice in order to feel our nervous system to feel settled, right? For example, you may be someone who responds to movements like a fast-paced movements really well. So that's important to start to recognize your own personal signs of activation and settling, because that's going to help you know whether a tool or a practice is supportive or resourcing for you, right? And having given you that list, I want to just say that that's not a complete list. Your body will invariably have its own unique expressions of what settling feels like to you and what activations feels like to you. So you can fill in this list. I would like you to understand your own and create your own unique sensory awareness list, because I think that's a pretty good place to start in terms of monitoring and tracking. So, whenever you are trying on different practices to have a sense of sort of checking in and getting a body level impression of where your nervous system is at before you try something, and then checking back in and seeing if it has shifted. Or is it neutral? Or is it more settled? Is it more activated? Because that's what's going to tell you whether a practice actually supportive or not to your system. And that's why I have this session feedback form before and after to track that, to help you that. Okay? So I hope you find that helpful. And one thing I want to say about that, resources don't always make us feel better. They don't always make us feel calmer. Sometimes they just are stabilizing. And if you have a neutral response to something, that is still a thumbs up from the nervous system. So it's much of a thumbs up from the nervous system response and a practice that make you feel calmer in a moment, because we can work with stabilizing the nervous system with practices that even feel neutral, but still allow us to focus back to the present moment sensation. So that is the focus of what I do and what we going to do here and what we're going to teach you to heal the nervous system. One of the best ways that I know how to work with it is to really do sensory exploration, to find ways to anchor back to simple, brief intervention of sensory awareness that are repeated over time. That allows our nervous system to orient back to possibility of safety in the present moment. For example, calm or a safe place. And of course, when we are talking about trauma physiology, one of the things that's happened in the nervous system has forgotten that capacity to orient back to safety of the present moment. It's still living in the arousal and the overwhelm of what happened to it, whether it was 20 years ago or 2 years ago or 2 hours ago. So this is very important for our nervous system, in terms of how to work with helping our nervous system and our bodies to reorient to safety. And the truth of the matter is that there are million and one different ways and more that you could anchor back to present moment sensation. So I would like you to guide through 3 potential practices to give you an opportunity to have a little bit of a dialogue with your nervous system, because that's really what we are having all day long. And so I want to help tune your awareness to this. So we are going to try 3 different focusing pathways. You will get a chance to see which of these pathways feels the most effective for you. It may be that all 3 of them feel effective, or maybe just one feels effective, or we are not, but we are all different. So remember, there's a never wrong answer here. It's just an information that's being provided by our nervous system and body responses. Okay. So the first exercise, we will do something called external focusing. And what I'm going to invite you to do is to just take a moment to check in, maybe a pause, get a sense of where your body at right now. What it feels like to be in your body right now. Right. And now I'm going to invite you to just take a few moments to look around the space that you are in. Like I can see a tree outside, I can see flowers, I can see the clear blue sky. So just take a stock of where you are. The chakra tapestry is really nice. I like this. I like my salt lamp. I like in my office here. You might be noticing some sounds, like I can hear the whooshing sound of wind. Just take a moment to really see where you are as you do, and notice all the visual cue. Could be an object, could be a light, shadow, for the next few moments. And then focus on the details, the sensory details of particular visual cue. For example, looking at a tree outside, I can see it's because it's autumn here, and I'm can see the color that is changing, the leaves changing their colors. Some leaves are green, some are a little bit reddish, purples, like autumnal colors. So take a moment to just check back in with your body now and notice if there is a shift in how your body feels. I feel I'm already feeling a bit more present and more relaxed. Does it feel the same as when you checked before we did the exploration? Or does it feel a little bit more settled, or does it feel a little bit more activated? And any of those could be true for you. So if your body had a neutral response, or if your body felt a bit more settled, then that is a potential practice that you can be working with to support your regulation. And if your nervous system felt activated by that, not to worry. That's just a really valuable information your nervous system telling you. Right? That may be stimulating for you, eh? Too much external focus can be activating for your system. Internal focusing, that's the next approach. And it's about looking inward. So I'm going to invite you to take a moment to check in with your body and identify a very concrete, like one physical sensation to focus on. Something pleasant or neutral to notice. I can see that my hands are more relaxed. Yeah. It helps to focus on the body in contact with the environment. So, some example would be noticing the feelings of your palm, of your hands resting on your knees. Or you can focus on the sensations of your bum or whatever surface you are sitting on. Could even be your feet on the floor. Sometimes static sensation is less comfortable to notice. So if you wanted to, you could bring some movements into a rub, your hands on your legs. For example, for me, rolling my neck right and left, it always helped me to actually see what is going inside in my body. Just to wiggle your toes, or maybe even to shift yourself, right? So once you have identified the internal sensation you want to focus on, just notice it for a few moments. And taking a moment to check back in and just notice the body's response. Neutral, more settled, more activated. Again, if you had a neutral response or more settled response, that's the practice you can be working with regularly as a way to start to train your awareness back to present moment sensation. Third one is a tactile focusing. So the tactile focusing is one more pathway just to give you a little bit of palette here. So I invite you to search out something nearby an object enough to rest in the palm of your hands. Like I can rest my palms on my desk here. Or you can grab something like a stone or anything, right? And once you have that object in your hand, I'm going to invite you to engage with it in several different ways. So, first, just hold it either in one or both hands, or just notice how that feels to hold it. And then you can try fiddling with it, whatever that looks like. Like, for example, I have this little bottle, essential oil bottle here, and I can just, I want to feel it, moving it in my hand, turning it around, stroking it with my fingers, just seeing it what it feels like to fiddle with this object. And then try to pass it back and forth between your hands and notice how it feels. And whichever way of working with the object, whichever style of engaging it felt the most attractive and most comfortable to you, go ahead. Right? In next few moments, just focus on that sensation of connecting with the object in a tactile way. And now check in back with your body and notice, did your body feel neutral in a response or settled or more activated? If you noticed a neutral or a more settled response, that is a practice you can begin working with. And the idea about these practices is that unlike more structured practices like yoga or meditation that require time out from our day, that requires a bit more space and intention, these are the practices that are really very easy to stitch into flow of your day to day. And it does require a little attention, right? Do the practice until you get more familiar with it. But very quickly what happens for all of my client is that what they find that their body just start doing this for them. They don't even have to think about doing this. Their body is doing it. And then these are the practices that can be used during moments of noticing, activation as a way to resource ourselves through the cycle of activation or overwhelm. and to come back towards stabilizing. So, the ability for us to grow our understanding of the nervous system and grow our understanding of how our nervous system is shifting back and forth between those different adaptive responses is important because that will allow you to recognize activation, modulation, and regulate your system. Okay? So you can keep showing up in a more embodied way with a truly trauma informed awareness. So that's really what I have for you today. And of course, I could go on. This is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of practices and explorations. There are so many different regulatory pathways that are alive in our bodies that we can learn to work with, but that's just a little taste for you. Hopefully, there is something that you can take away practically from this lesson and begin to really apply to your day to day to help you begin this journey of growing your awareness with your nervous system and your own regulatory capacity. It's been such a pleasure to guide you through this exploration. If there are any questions, you are most welcome to ask, to contact me if something wasn't clear. I wish you all great success and growth as you find your way through this amazing program. Take care.